Welcome to the Mission Minded Podcast, and we are so excited you are tuning in with us today. I am your host, Rachel Miller, and I have the privilege of leading this podcast with my best friend and co-host, Bella Comfer. Our mission is to fulfill the Great Commission by bringing our listeners closer to Jesus through each conversation. So let's jump right in. Welcome back, everybody, to the Mission Minded Podcast. Today, we would like to touch on the topic of sin. And last episode, we talked about sanctification and what that means. And before we get to the topic of sin, though, we really want to use this first couple minutes to clarify some things that we talk about in some of our episodes that maybe we didn't fully go over or things that we just want to clarify. And so today, we would like to clarify something that you mentioned in episode 2, saying that as a scientist, it is at the core of your beliefs it's difficult to be an atheist, where you can be a sincere deist as a scientist. And so I know that there were some people that were kind of confused by that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So Dr. Anstine, if you could explain that.
Yeah, I would love to. So in these big what we call worldviews, whether it's theism, deism, or atheism, and I would argue that at the end of the day, you really only have 3 doors. Okay, you have atheism, you have deism, and you have theism. Theism is going to have a lot of different denominations, whether it's Jewish or you could even put Hindu in there or Muslim in there. There are many different denominations of atheism. Some are materialists. Some believe that there is some greater mind out there, but it's just not a personal mind. That moves then on into a little bit of deism. So each of these main categories of atheism, theism, and deism all have subsets. It's not like you're just this, but you have a couple tenets that you believe. When we put Christianity or Jesus following religion, quote unquote, into the theism category, and then we put atheism into there is no God, period. What's happening there is we're saying as an atheist that there is no mind, there is no rationality to the universe. So with that, the universe is basically arose from completely accidental, improbable, whatever you want to categorize that. It just leapt into existence. Because of that narrative, what happens is we have a really hard time putting any kind of a design component into there because it's an irrational occurrence. It just happened, right? We just are. And you can go to the multiverse, denomination of atheism and say, okay, well, there's an infinite number of universes. We just happen to live in the one that has all the parameters that actually work. When you're an atheist would struggle with the concept of absolute truth, for example. That would be one area where science believes in truth. Mm-hmm. Science believes in absolute truth. It's called mathematics. 2 + 2 absolutely equals 4. Yeah. Now, you might not say 2 and 2. You might not say dose and dose. You might say, 2 chairs or this quantity of chairs and this quantity of chairs equals this quantity of chairs. You can see it without using the word 2 and 4 and plus and equals. But it's absolute truth that 2 and 2 make 4. These 2 make, or 1 and 1 make 2, or whatever mathematics. That's an absolute truth. Whereas in atheism, you don't believe in absolute truth. And so those two are not compatible. When we're talking about truth, and an atheist would say, well, ultimately, there is no absolute truth. But yes, in science, we do have absolute truth, which aligns with Christianity, because Christianity says we do have absolute truth. Jesus calls himself the Logos in John 1, or John calls him the Logos in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Logos, the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That is absolutely true. I am the way, the truth, the life. So Christianity believes in absolute truth. Science believes in absolute truth. The atheist is going to struggle with absolute truth. That would just be one example of where atheism and science would struggle. And I wouldn't say incompatible, because again, like I said, depending on what denomination of atheist you are, you might be an atheist that believes in truth. But most atheists categorically would not believe in absolute truth. So that wouldn't be compatible with what we know through science. Another example that wouldn't be compatible would be, is the universe designed to accommodate life? The atheist is going to say no. It's just, again, we're just brains on a stick. We just happen to be in the probable universe that leapt life into existence. Good for us, right? That's not consistent with science. Science says, no, the universe is fine-tuned for carbon to be a very special atom that we can build molecules on that build life. So science says, no, the universe is very finely tuned for life. The atheist says, no, we're just in the universe that happened to be designed. The Christian says, no, God said, let us make man in our image. So Christianity and science are much more aligned when it deals with the design characteristics that we see coming out of science. So those are just, and I could keep going.
Yeah.
But just to respond to that, the atheist is going to, I'm not going to say it's not like incompatible, but it's a more difficult time than someone that's following a rational mind, using my rational mind to see the world around me, which is what science originally was. You have to remember, it's the Christian worldview that brought science to its forefront. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the atheistic view. Yeah. In fact, atheism has killed more people than all religions combined.
Yeah.
People want to bring up the Crusades. The absolute most generous death toll in the Crusades is 40,000 people. That's generous. More than likely, it's probably in the teens of how many people died during the Crusades. And all but one of the Crusades were actually defensive. The church was trying to defend itself from the onslaught of Islam taking over. They weren't offensively going out and beating people up. But when you look at atheism's up in the tens of millions of people that have died through that as quote unquote a religion. So we want to be careful that atheism gets this it gets this free ride, right? That it's the best way to think as a scientist. But when we push back on it, atheism actually has a very, very, very bad track record just in the human experience itself. So
anyway. And that's also cool that I didn't even realize there's different kinds of atheism. I've always just thought atheism was just you don't believe in a God or that there's a higher power at all. Yeah. But that's interesting that you mentioned that there's different levels of it too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just like in Christianity, there's different levels of what we believe, right? I mean, there's different. You're more of a Wesleyan. You're more of a Calvinist or whatever. Non-denominational. I'm non-denom. Yeah, Nazarene. Exactly. Right. and atheism has the same thing, and it mostly it deals with the level of complexity and where complexity, reducible complexity comes from and how we reduce that. But anyway, that's a completely different subject, which would be fun to tackle. But again, I think we were going to move on to something else today.
Yeah. Did we want to do the other question we got?
We can do that on the next episode.
Okay, sweet. So this podcast, we were hoping to touch on the problem of sin and just think about what is sin. Again, it's a church word that if you grew up in the church, you hear it a lot and maybe don't have a ton of explanation for what it actually is. So to kind of start us off, could you help us just understand what sin is, as a basic principle?
Just give a good definition.
Yeah.
Sure. It's a Greek term, harmatia or harmatias, depending on, again, the form. But harmatia basically is a archery term. And it's not a church word. It's an archery term, and it simply means, as I think you said at the beginning, it just means missing the mark. So when you look at an archery, a dartboard or a archery board, you'll have the bullseye, and then you'll have rings that go out, and each of those rings is called a sin. First sin, second sin, third sin, and all that. So if you're not hitting the bullseye, if you're not hitting the target, you're hitting off the target, you're hitting outside of the target, or you're hitting you're off the mark. That's where the term comes from. So when we use the term within the church or within a biblical worldview, we're talking about missing the mark. And the question then we have to ask is, what's the mark? And so one of the things that I think is really important for us to flush out, is to respond to, is so let me back up 1 second. So oftentimes I think growing up in the church, we view sin as specific acts. And it's true that there are acts that are related that would be missing the mark, so to speak. But I think the focus is off when we do that. We're looking for, well, if I'm not doing this, we put a little check mark. If I'm not doing this, I'll put a little check mark.
Here's my huge list of all the things
I don't do.
Not do.
Right? And so with that, we're really missing what's going on, the essence of what the concept of sin in a biblical context would be. Because obviously, we'll just answer, the mark is Jesus, right? The more that I align my life with Jesus, the less I am missing the mark, right? And you could say the less I am sinning, but I don't like to use that word.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, remember, if you back up, what is the ultimate human experience? We talked about this with a little bit with ontology. The ultimate human experience, us being different than the angelic world and different than the animal world, we are human. We have free will. And again, we'll talk about free will and evil down in an upcoming, I think, podcast. Yeah. We need to. But we are unique. We can choose to disregard what we know to be right. Okay, my dog cannot. Now, we could argue that it knows that it shouldn't dumpster dive, but it still does. Why? Well, she knows because there's food in it that she's going to take that thing apart and she wants to get the free scraps out of there. Is that missing the mark? It's not. It's not to her because she is programmed to go for food. Her nose smells it. Her mouth wants it, and she eats it, right?
And she doesn't have the spirit in her either.
Exactly. To know when is this good or evil, right? And this was the original. God doesn't want you to know good from evil, right?
Yeah.
And so that was part of the original temptation to do your own thing, and that's where missing the mark comes from. Ultimately, what we were convinced of, or Adam and Eve were convinced of, was to do it your way. You don't need help to discern good and evil. God doesn't want you to be like him. That's why he's told you not to eat of the fruit. Once you eat of the fruit, you're going to know good from evil. You're going to have this knowledge. And they did have knowledge. They gained a knowledge, but the problem was they gained a knowledge in and of themselves autonomously from his revelation. So the original fall was God saying, no, trust me. I will tell you the way things are. I will give you what you need to live. I will give you truth that will show you the way that leads to life, right? God knew this. Yeah. He knew that we were going to bite into the apple. So he had a plan. And so going back and seeing this all in context, there are 3 rebellions in Scripture. Most times from the pulpit, we're only taught one, Adam and Eve. The second rebellion is what happened with the angels before the flood in Genesis 6:1-4. And the third rebellion that happened is the Tower of Babel. Okay, so you have 3, and at some point we should probably cover all 3 of those because they're very important. And most people growing up in the church, I would say 95% of churchgoers have no clue of how the other 2 rebellions fit into the grand rebellion, the grand problem of what we're facing in the real world.
I don't even think I probably do.
Okay, and that would be something to flesh out. Why Adam and Eve? Why the flood? And why Babel? Or Babel? Why those 3 rebellions led to Jesus having to come back and reverse what we call reversing Hermon, reversing what happened with this angelic realm of beings. That goes back then to this sin concept. And by the way, when we talk about evil, we're going to bring this right back up because this is also related. But specifically in the church, missing the mark is missing Jesus' best for my life. And when you go back to the sanctification part of our podcast, talking about the switch on the flashlight, the switch on the flashlight, because we're human, we have the choice. Going back to my dog analogy, Lucky, my little dog, she doesn't have a switch in her, like you were saying, Rachel. She doesn't have a soul, or she doesn't have a spirit that can differentiate
what's right and wrong.
Right, exactly. She's not rational. You think of I think of my daughter Jessie has 3 chickens, Snap, Crackle, and Pop. Okay. They're super
Sorry,
cute.
That's amazing.
I know, they're super cute, and they run around our yard. We live in Eagle, which we probably shouldn't have chickens, but we have 3 beautiful little they're black chickens. In fact, we just had our first egg today, so we're excited.
Gosh.
Yeah, so we're so excited. So those chickens are pretty amazing. She'll let them out in the morning. They'll go around our yard. They stay close to our house. We live on about an acre. When it starts to get dark out, those chickens go right in their coop with the door open, and they go right up in their little perch. And why? Because they're programmed to know when the sun's going down. That means go in, right? There's no like I'm looking at the sun, therefore I should go in. There's no rational. It's just like I am programmed to know when the sun goes down, I go in. That's the animal world. We're not that way. We're not programmed as animals just to respond. We are given a choice. And this goes back when we talk about evil. We are imagers of God. We are very, very special in our creation because we have with this stubborn thing called free will. So when we go back to the switch is my decision to do his way or my way. Okay? So sin, as I was mentioning earlier, sin isn't just a checkbox of things that I do or don't do, right? You think about it in the church, we have sins of omission, things I'm not doing, and sins of commission, things that I am doing, right? And so oftentimes we make laundry lists of, well, I need to minimize this list and maximize this list, right? And we start to live our life by a metric of lists. That's missing what this is. Jesus says, no, I want to walk with you. I want to show you where joy comes from, where peace comes from, where beauty and love come from. And when you walk with me, you'll see that. When you choose not to do it your way, right? I always call it the Frank Sinatra way. I did it my way. When you do that, you're turning the switch off, the light goes off, and now you're off doing your own thing. That is what the Bible calls sin. I grew up with, well, don't listen to Van Halen, wear a collared shirt, have your hair cut above your ears, these weird things. Don't go to movies, don't dance. All these things we start to label as quote unquote sin. But that's not what that's not the biblical context of sin. Sin is much more fundamental than that. Sin is living life my way. And if you want an analogy of that, think of if your dad was like a master fence builder and said, okay, let's build a fence today. And you said, great, let's go build a fence. So you and your dad build a fence. He shows you how to use the tools. He shows you how to use the plumb line to make it straight. Shows you all this beautiful thing. That's the community. That's the relationship he's asking. But you could also say, he told me to make a fence. I'm going to go make a fence on my own. And what are you going to do? You're not going to go to the master for how to use the tools, how to plumb line, how to dig the holes. You don't even really know what you're doing. You're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
You're on your own. That's what he doesn't want, because he loves us. He wants the relationship. He wants the community together with us. So when we don't invite him into the moment, when we're not following his best, right, we're missing the mark. We're living a life in sin. And again, in the church growing up, we've got to break out of this. It's specific acts.
Yeah.
Are specific acts missing mark? Of course they are. But sin is so much more fundamental to living life autonomously in and of myself apart from him, right? I'm doing it my way, not his way. And oftentimes we can be doing some very sincere, very good things. But if we're doing it our way, without him, that is actually technically a life of missing the mark. It's a life of sin, even though it's not something egregious like stealing or murder or something like that. It's still missing the mark. And so sin is so much more fundamental. It's so much more in our daily life than we realize, right? Oftentimes it's easy to get up, have our quiet time, maybe a cup of coffee, maybe throw a little Air One on, have our spiritual moment. And then what do? The rest of my day is a Frank Sinatra day. I'm doing things my way. Well, where's Jesus in that? He's up there with his open arms saying, hey, invite me into that, right? I want to build the fence with you.
Yeah.
I want to teach that organic lecture with you, right? I want to go into the nurse. I want to be with you in that operating room or wherever you're working. That's what he wants, because it's a relational life that he's invited us to live.
Yeah. And I feel like that kind of relates back to how, like, at least things that we've talked about over the years, I feel like whenever I was like, I feel like I keep falling into this pattern of, like, I have this, I don't know, let's say like anxiety or something like that during college. I was like, how can I like stop feeling this way? Or like, even, I don't know, like if it's necessary, like again, a sin, but I felt apart from Jesus, and I was like, I feel distant from him. Like, how can I make this stop? And then you use this analogy of like, well, you can only have your thoughts on one thing or the other. Like, you can't have your thoughts on like multiple things at one time. And so you're like, try to think of the number 7. And now I was thinking about the number 7, and you're like, now try not to think about the number 6. And you're like, how would you do that? Just like think of 7 or 8 or whatever number that's not 6. And so I think the same can relate to sin. When you're in a pattern of kind of like not constantly, but just not being close to the Lord, it's easy to keep looking at the thing that you're doing and so focused on that it keeps causing you to stumble and be in it. But then if you're more focused on the Lord and like, Lord, how can you help me through this? Or I just want to be closer to you in your spirit in this moment, and calling like the Spirit into your life. I feel like that can help you stop living apart from him. Am I on the right track?
Oh my
when
word.
I'm saying that?
I love that. So the Lord taught me this years ago, and is teaching me. I'm not going to say I've mastered this by far. But in that, for me, it started with picking out socks in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, it struck me like, oh my word, you actually care. And so I started inviting him into, Lord, what should I wear today? Should I wear white socks? Should I wear black socks? Should I one of each? Just kind of a humorous thing. To when I went to the store, Lord, do you want to pick out carrots with me? What bag of carrots? Inviting, and I started treating him as he really cared, and he's really there, because he really is, and he really does. Mm-hmm. But the more that I was just push him away, right? In your analogy, which is a great analogy, focusing on the number 6 instead of the number 7, where's the life in that? Where is the true life that we've been called to live, which is the community, which is the relationship with him? So I have a choice. Every decision I make, I can do it in and of myself, on my own, like this little switch on the flashlight, or I can invite him into it. And I am fully convinced that he loves the little things as much as the big things. In fact, one of the things we talked about in church this morning was the difference between Chronos time and Kairos time. And I believe that the moment time, the Kairos time, are those times where we invite him into that moment. I think when we slow down and say, okay, Lord, help me pick out socks, help me pick out the carrots at the grocery store, help me, whatever it is, you're inviting him in. Because what does he say? He actually says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give, take my yoke upon you, it's easy and slow. He's saying, I want to live life with you. That's why I created you, was for relationship, not for you to be some deist, autonomously living your life for yourself, having a quiet time once in a while, listening to a Christian praise song once in a while. I want you. I love you. Let's walk this life together, not you doing your own thing. And so that concept of sin is me literally living my life in and of my own strength, my own desires, my own will.
Yeah. And then I feel like we can also tie that back into our podcasts on like justification and sanctification. And I feel like if we focus on knowing that like we are justified by the blood alone, and that we cannot be righteous on our own strength at all, and we fully rely on the Lord, then we want to invite him into every part of our day and say like, Lord, come sit with me and do this with me. Lord, come do this with me. Or like even how you use the analogy of being at Winco and being like frustrated with drivers.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Lord, please help me because I don't want to be nice right now, but I need you to help me be nice.
That's exactly
So I feel like
right.
in moments like that. And then I do kind of want to wrap around to another topic, but there's a verse, and I don't know the reference. You might know it better than I would. But there's a verse that says something related to how like not all sin is necessarily, or not everything I do is quote unquote a sin, or not everything I do is wrong, but not everything is fruitful for me.
Okay, is that Paul in Corinthians?
I think so.
Okay, yep.
I just thought it was interesting.
All things are permissible, but not all things are of benefit to me. Is that the okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just because sometimes I feel like we, again, like in the church, grow up thinking or just viewing things like, okay, if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm good.
Yeah.
But again, like not all things are fruitful for you either. So whether it's not quote unquote a checkmark sin, like just because you go and do something doesn't mean it's also fruitful for you either, which I think is interesting.
Well, and I think what Paul is alluding to, if that's the verse we want to drill down a little bit, what he's saying is, because of justification, because of the blood of Jesus, all things are available to me. And you can put that in the context, and we could even probably go to Romans 14 and pull some of it out there too. But oftentimes what happens with the idea of sin or missing the mark, it's a slippery slope on what I define, or what the church or what our community has defined as good or bad. Okay, and so Paul also in Romans 14 says that the faith that you have as your own faith. To some he can eat vegetables, to some he can eat meat. Whatever the Lord has put on your heart to be right or wrong as far as vegetables and meat in Romans 14 analogy, have that between you and the Lord. So oftentimes in the church, people that we walk with make rules that they get mad at us for not following. Paul is saying, no, that is not the way it should be. This is something between you and the Lord. Now, if it's outside of a clear commandment, that's different. But if we're talking about meat and vegetables, if we're talking about, I think the elephant in the room is alcohol. Okay, to be honest with you, especially in the Nazarene, our world, right? Yeah, I know a lot of your friends that would drink. I know a lot of friends I run with would have a glass of wine in the evening, right? Is that sin, right? Within the context of the Nazarene world, that is a big one.
Because a lot of people would be like, oh, well, Jesus drank wine. And I know there's a lot of like, people
Yeah.
go back and forth with that.
Yeah, let's just hit that one real quick. So when Jesus turned, very first miracle, right? Water to wine. Why that, right? And you have to remember that miracle is like, it was the second day of the marriage in the evening. So you're already 2 days into this thing. All the wine's gone, meaning they drank it all. And Jesus is asked to make more. And he turns those 5 vessels, and that equates to like 970 bottles of wine, right? It's a lot of wine that he makes. I mean, when you quantify that, it's a lot of wine that he makes. Second day of this feast. Here's the thing that we need to understand: the exact same Greek word used for wine there, water to wine, is the exact same Greek word that Paul uses when it says "don't get drunk on wine." So what Jesus makes and what Paul says to be careful not to get drunk on is exactly, so let's lose the grape juice story. Let's lose all, it's the exact same thing, okay?
Yeah.
So Jesus is making full-blown wine. Now that's not an easy concept, right? Here's the thing. The faith that you have between you and the Lord. If you're okay between you and Jesus to have a glass of wine, have a glass of wine. Mm-hmm. If not, don't.
Yeah.
But what I really would caution people, don't put your convictions on someone else, right? If it's adultery, if it's murder, if it's one of these that we know is clear cut,
like the Lord says,
the absolute boom, it's black and white. But these other ones, the length of your hair, right? What movie you go to. Now, you could probably argue there's also, don't let your mind dwell on these things. You could probably say, there's probably a metric there that I probably should be a little more selective on the movies I watch because I do like intense movies, right?
I know.
But I think that's a very important thing for sin, because so oftentimes we've come across these judgmental people who are saying don't do. And so oftentimes the world looks on and says, why in the world would I want to join a group of people that are a bunch of have no fun, don't do anything that's enjoyable, and say don't all the time, right? I really want to be a part of that group. That is so not our God. Mm-hmm. Our God says, no, I've invited you into life. Mm-hmm. I've come to give it to you abundantly. It does have its parameters. It does have what I would call the way, and it's a narrow way, right? And the narrow way, by the way, is obedience. That's what we're to do. The way is obedience. Trust and obey. Trust me and then obey me. And so when we have something in our life that we've prayed through, and I know we've talked off camera several times on things like, man, what do I do with this? When we pray about it, and the Lord puts something on our hearts, like, okay, Lord, I think that's from you. I'm going to go with that right now. You might change it on the road. It's like, nah, I'm going to, but I'm going to obey you in what I believe you to be saying right now, whether it be eating vegetables or meat or having a glass of wine or whatever it is. Because I do think that this idea, this concept so oftentimes is repulsive. And I'm not going to take it to the point of like this all-inclusive, seeker-friendly. I think we were talking about that. Like you have the cafe in the front of the sanctuary.
Oh, uh-huh.
Because what I want to be careful with is the church, the original model of the church, and we can get into this if that, because I know you had another question, and maybe we'll save that for the next podcast episode intro or whatever. But I do think what happens with the church is we have to be careful that we don't become a slippery slope of seeker-friendly to the point where we're allowing everything to come through the door. That's not what the church was, right? There is clear-cut sin that is very mandated in Scripture. Said, no, these are the boundaries on this. These are quote unquote the rules. But within that, there's actually a lot of freedom, which is what Paul is getting to. All things are permissible. Not all things are profitable, so I'm not going to do it. But all things are permissible for me. And I think with that, if we truly understand the nature of sin and what it means for us to walk with Jesus, not missing the mark, more and more, less missing the mark, then we understand where abundant life comes from. So I think, I don't know if you want to follow up questions, because I have one last thought on that concept. If
I wasn't sure if you had
Bella?
things to say, 'cause you've been quiet over here.
I know, I've been quiet. I've been taking it in. Like I think everything you have been saying, just like it makes a lot of sense, and it kind of puts the emphasis back in like the relationship aspect rather than becoming legalistic about sin and stuff. And so I guess my question is like, I feel like on one side we have like this Old Testament, like here's the 10 Commandments, just don't do these things and you're good. And then like you mentioned, there's also this side that says we don't want to turn anyone away. We're not going to call anything sin. and we're not going to hold anyone accountable, and that doesn't feel right either. And so it's like, I guess this give and take between like taking scripture seriously, but then also having like not like having the speck in the plank in your eye, like not coming at it with a judgmental framework, but thinking like, how can I love someone through this? I don't know if that makes sense.
100%. Bella, I'm going to say you hit on two very important things, and maybe we could land the plane with this. Number one, why does the Old Testament seem more rigid, more bloody, more harsh, right? And then we get to the New Testament, it's all about love. And you're like, well, what in the world's going on here, right? It almost seems like these testaments are very different. Here's what we need to really understand. When we are talking about the Old Testament, the Old Covenant going back to the Mosaic covenant of the 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments were given, and they were given not to be kept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay? That's weird, because you're like, well, what did you just say? That's blasphemy. That's heresy. Even Paul himself says that the law was given to point out sin, right? Yeah. All the law did was put the label on the bottle. The bottle was there, sin. Paul, the 10 Commandments came along and said, look, these are the things you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. And so what did they do? They tried to stop doing them in and of their own strength, because they didn't have the power of the Spirit at that time. The Spirit came and went. So the whole point of the 1,000+ years, or 100+ years, hundreds of years that the Old Testament or the Old Covenant was given through the law was to show that we can't keep the law. And now we've talked about this, right? Yeah. Don't you put a sign on the grass? Don't step on the grass. What do you want to do? There's something inside me that's going to step on that grass. That's sin, by the way. There is a sin nature. There's something inside of me that wants to do my own thing. I want to step on the daggum grass because I'm programmed for that, right? I'm programmed to step on the grass. So what the law did, the law came along and said, don't step on the grass. And what do? You're stepping on the grass, because it's pointing out that, look, you need help.
Yeah, like you can't do this on your own.
You can't do this on your own. So the whole point of the law was to show that we can't keep it. And this is where you get the weird 600+ sub-laws that the Pharisees put on, or the Jews put on from the 10. Like, well, you don't spit on Sunday because that's work. And all these weird things where you're like, what in the world? Because they were trying to live by this legalistic, like you were saying, this legalistic do's and don'ts. That's not the point of the law. The law was to say, look, you need help, which goes back to, like you were saying, Rachel, on justification. Once I realize it's by the blood of Jesus alone, through faith in that alone, then I am set right. The battery goes back in. Now I'm learning more and more to walk with him, to invite him into picking out socks, to inviting to picking out carrot. I'm inviting him into the mundane of my life, not just saving him for the highs on Sunday and the highs on Wednesday night Bible study. He's involved in everything I'm trying to do. In fact, Brother Lawrence wrote a book years ago. I think it's the second or third most published book of all time. Next, I think Bible's 1, Pilgrim's Progress is 2, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Practicing His Presence is number 3. I could be wrong on that, but it's called Practicing His Presence. And Brother Lawrence was a monk, and he wondered, is it possible to invite Jesus into everything I do? And so he journals it. And the whole book's just basically his journey of what would it look like if I invited him very first thing when I get up in the morning, my feet hit the ground, Jesus, help me put on my socks and my slippers. Jesus, help me put on my robe, because he was a monk, right? Jesus, go to breakfast with me. Jesus, come. What would it look like if I invited Jesus into if I didn't miss the mark at all throughout the day? Which goes back to sanctification, right? I think the question came up from someone off camera. Well, can you drill down a little bit more on eternal sanctification, or never sinning on earth? And I think that's an important reminder that if sin is a list, and I can look at the list and go, I haven't done any of that today, I haven't sinned. Yeah. But have I done all that in my own strength, or have I done that all with him? There's the difference, because if I've done it all in my own strength, guess what? That's missing the mark.
Yeah.
But if I've done all that inviting him into it, I'm walking with him. This is an interesting thing in John 5, and again, John 5, it says Jesus, the Son, can do nothing in and of himself. And Rachel, I could probably pull that up. I don't.
Yeah, I was like, I'm trying to flip to it. Do you know what verse it is?
Yeah, it's like 5. It's later. Hang on one second. Here, I don't even.
You probably have it highlighted in like a little comment.
Yeah, right. So if you go, because I want you to see this. This is an important thing, because even the God-man himself here in John 5, and it's going to be 5:19.
Okay.
So read it 5:19, and then read 5:30. Read those two in your translation.
Okay, so Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise." And then which one?
30.
30. Okay. "I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me."
Okay, do you see what's going on here? Here's the second person of the Trinity. Here's the God-man. And what does he say? I can do nothing on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Why did Jesus live the sinless life? Not because he didn't have a glass of wine, not because he didn't have his hair cut above his ears, or go to a movie, or you fill in the check mark from our whatever denomination you grew up in. He never sinned because his eyes never went off his Father.
Dang.
Not once did he break fellowship from inviting his Father into everything. He's telling us this.
Yeah.
I can do nothing
Yeah.
on my own. Why? Because I am so at one with my Father. My Father's in me, I'm in my Father. That's where we get the word meno. It's abide is our translation of that.
Mm-hmm.
He's so abound with his Father that not once did his eyes go off his dad, right? That's a sinless life.
Yeah.
So the question, going back to that sanctification, how often do our eyes go off Jesus? Well, my eyes go off Jesus a lot.
Yeah.
I might not, whatever the check mark is, but my eyes do go off Jesus. So that's why I struggle with that concept of, could I practice 24/7, or could I never? For me, I want that.
Yeah.
I just know it's not a reality in my life. So I don't want to ever say that my life was without sin, because I do know that I go Frank Sinatra a lot in my life.
Yeah.
Now, what I would like to wrap up with is to me one of the more helpful analogies that I think in bringing this kind of circling back around. In data sets, you have two ways of looking at data. You have what's called a bounded set and a centered set data. In bounded set, you have clear boundaries. So like a set of triangles. They're going to have 3 angles, they're going to have 3 sides. But to be a triangle, you have to have certain sets, right? It's called a bounded set. To be a square, you have to have 4 angles and 4 sides, right? And this type of thing. In centered set, you don't have the bounds, you have the center. And the data is measured how close it is to the center. Whereas bounded set is how much is it within the bounds of the definition. So when we look at data, when we look at this idea of sets, in a bounded set, so often we transpose Christianity into a bounded set. It's this by this by this. Therefore, if you're doing this, you are that, right? You are a Christian if you're this, 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 and this. If you're not doing this, 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 this. We bound it to a set. Nowhere in Scripture do you find that. What we do find is centered set. We find centered set. How close are you to the center? How close am which is the mark. How close am I to Jesus? And yes, you could say the farther away from Jesus are those concentric, or those rings of sin. But how close am I to the center is the key to following Jesus. So with this, in fact, the great kind of aha of this is in Australia. The cattle ranchers, they had 2 ways of keeping the cattle on these big, massive, tens of thousands of acre ranches. One was to make a bunch of fences. But if you're on a 2,000 acre ranch, that's a lot of fence, right? A lot of fence to maintain, a lot of money, a lot of work to keep it up. But yes, it will keep the cows in, right? The other way they figured out was just to dig a well. No fence, just dig a well. What are the cows going to do? They're not going to go very far from where they know the water source is. One's a bounded set and one's a centered set. So oftentimes with this idea of sin, we want to think of a bounded set. You're in or you're out. If you're doing all this, you're out. If you're doing all this, you're in, right? And that's not what we see. That's going back to the legalistic old covenant rule setting, sins of omission, sins of commission. What we see in the New Testament is this love. I am the drink of me, the water of life. He who drinks of me will never thirst, right? Because he is the living well. He's the living water. So the closer I am to Jesus, the more I'm drinking of him, the more I'm abiding in him, the more I'm living life, the less I'm doing life my way apart from him. I'm inviting him into everything I do, and I'm living a life that is not missing the mark.
Dang. That's so cool, because I feel like even I was just at the porch this last week, and like they were talking about how like in relationships, they were talking about a dating series, but talking about like
Classic porch.
Yes, right.
But they're talking about how like a lot of people are like, how close can I get to the line of like how far I shouldn't or should go?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's not about how close can we get to the cliff before we eventually fall off.
Yeah.
It's like, no, how far away can I get from that line so I can be closer to Jesus?
Amen.
And I mean, and we can take that anywhere, not just with like the relationships like they had on that sermon, but that was just so interesting that you said that. It totally clicked in my mind, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's so helpful.
Yeah.
Well,
And I know you also had a question about logistically how about judgment.
Right. Yeah, I guess like,
Because I wanted to wrap it up in a way where we can give people a logistic way of how we can like
Practical.
a practical way of.
right. I think what we were talking about was just like, obviously, in the Bible we read about like, we're not supposed to call out or like looking at the speck in our neighbor's eye while we have the plank in our eye. Like we can easily become judgmental in that legalistic setting. And then also the Bible does talk about like Christian brothers like keeping each other accountable, like through, I don't know, just holding each other accountable, I guess. And so it's like, where's that line between calling out sin in your friend but also doing it in like a Christ-like
in
way?
love,
Because like we're not judgmental, but we can also help hold each other accountable so that we can become closer to Jesus and like not do those things, I guess.
And that's where that's where the beauty of community comes in, is vital. So oftentimes, unfortunately, what happens on Sunday morning is not community. Right, I refer to it loosely as the dog and pony show. Right, we're using lights and smoke and lasers and all this cool entertainment stuff. We're having a great experience, but where's the real intimacy between sister to sister, brother to brother? Where's the iron sharpening? Where's the true fellowship happening? Because when I am in community, I am a big proponent. One of the things my dad taught me years ago is we need 3 people groups in our life. We need Paul's, we need Barnaby, and we need Timothy's. Okay, we have to have those. Those are the 3 people groups in our life. We have to have them, or we're not healthy. Okay, we have to have the mentor in our life, or the person, and we might just go to that person once or twice a year, or once or twice a month. We're not pestering them. But man, when I need some advice, this is the person I'm going to. Okay, I need the Barnaby in my life. I need the bros that I'm walking with on a daily, open basis, where they know my life, they know me very in and out, they know what I'm struggling with, they know where I'm at. Right, those are my Barnaby, those are my brothers, and there's not a very big group. I have like 3 or 4 of them. Right, and then we have to have our Timothys. If we are not pouring into someone else's life, we are unhealthy. We are very unhealthy. In fact, think of the seas, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the Dead Sea because everything runs in and nothing runs out. The Sea of Galilee is the most fertile area in the entire region because it's in and out, right? Yeah. That's what we should be. We have to have that Timothy group. So going back to that Barnaby group, if I don't have that true open group of brothers walking with me, I'm not healthy. They're the ones oftentimes that point out, whoa, bro, what's up with this, right? I'm open with them. They're open with me. We're honest. We're sharpening. We're encouraging one another. Because so oftentimes I get blinded and I don't know, right? I'm my worst enemy and I don't even know it half the time. When I run it by these guys, like, what in the world were you thinking there, right? And they're honest with me and we're calling out sin, we're confessing, and we're moving on, right? We're not belaboring it, we're moving on. I have to have that. I absolutely have to. We all have to have that. And if we're not living in that triad, we're really not healthy. And so with that, I think with the bounds of the church is very clear. Here's the thing I want us to be very clear on, and we could do a whole episode on the church. The original model of the church was more like a country club in a way that it had clear doors to it. It was a clear, we are going to love each other so well that the world's going to look on and go, I want to be a part of that. Yeah. Right? That was the original model. We were supposed to be a community of love, of giving, of sharing, of honesty, of openness and brokenness and prayer and just helping each other, right? I think of your profession as triage. Church was supposed to be triage. That's what church was supposed to be. We come to triage. We got beat up by the world. We're gonna assess who needs what and who needs bandage, and let's get right back out to the world and get beat up again. That was the model. But the church was supposed to be this community that was so in love, so gentle, so patient, so kind, all the fruit of the Spirit just flowing through. The world looks on and goes, I want to be a part of that. But what's happened is we become a bunch of Pharisees. We've become a bunch of people that don't, and critical and judgmental. And the world's like, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Right? So within the bounds of the church, yes, there are clear boundaries. There are clear, this is right, this is wrong, and we need to call each other out and say, hey, we really shouldn't be, let's talk about that. Right? Even Paul says we're going to deliver this person up to Satan so that Satan will punish and really bring him back to his senses. And that was the original intent, I believe, of the original church. We have become more of the country club church in that we're just looking for the entertainment and the experience. We're not looking for the accountability and true that intimacy and really knowing each other from that heart level. That's a great question, by the way, Bill. I appreciate that.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts. I feel like that's a good place to kind of...
Yeah, I was like, did you have anything you wanted to end on or say more? Because I know we kind of interrupted you and went down a different trail.
No, that's great. I hope it didn't. I hope our caprices weren't too... I hope we were able to follow.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm satisfied with our conversation.
Well, yeah, so I wanted to kind of wrap up that episode on sin, and then hopefully in the next episode or so, we'll talk about the problem of evil. But if you guys do feel like you need more clarification on that subject, please let us know, because we can always talk more about it and bring it up in other podcasts. So thank you so much for listening, and then come back when we talk about the problem of evil.